Middlesex County was formed in 1785 from portions of Hartford County and New London County. And as such, a county had to provide a jail and a courthouse. Now, for some strange reason, Middlesex County designated two county seats, Haddam and Middletown. And so each town was required to build a jail and a courthouse. And Middletown had temporary jail quarters, while the Haddam jail was the primary jail for Middlesex County.
The Middlesex County Jail was actually an economic boon for Haddam because it brought all sorts of people into town and spurred the economy in those days. It was also the first agricultural jail where the prisoners actually created their own produce, and they raised animals, and that's what they also sold it to people around town as well.
Fortunately, we had this great granite quarry in town, and that supplied the building material for the courthouse as well as for the jail. Now, the courthouse stood just about a half a mile to the north of the jail, and unfortunately that was destroyed by a fire in 1929, but the jail survives, and it's a very significant landmark to that time period of the 18th and 19th centuries here in Haddam, and even into the 20th century. Originally, the jail in Haddam was a wooden building located right next door to the current jail, but that was replaced in 1845 with the stone jail, or a portion of the stone jail that you see now. And it was built of Haddam granite, locally quarried by the Arnold family. It remained a jail, an active jail, probably up until the late 1960s, early 1970s. And then it closed and it became a training facility.
The state was using it as a training facility for their Department of Corrections, and they would train their guards here. They no longer needed it. At that point, they asked the town if they would like to acquire it for $1. It also came with all of the property on both sides of Jail Hill Road, including the sports fields right now.
Early on, it was sort of a self-sufficient facility. They would actually have a farm. So they would grow their own food. They had a dairy, so they would produce their own dairy products, such as milk. They also provided food and things to the local orphanage, which was located just down the street. So it was interesting that it was an agricultural jail, is what they called it, and it was self-sufficient, which is unusual for many facilities of that type. There were no fences. There was no barbed wire, and a lot of the interesting stories from the Haddam jail is how many prisoners would just wander off, jump a train, and either head north or south. So there were numerous occasions when people would actually just walk off.
The other interesting thing about the jail is people actually used to commit crimes to be incarcerated in the jail.
At one point, I think in the early 20th century, the Haddam jail was actually called the Country Club, because a lot of people who, may have been homeless or didn't have a place to stay would actually get arrested, probably around November or so, try to get a 3-month term to spend in jail, and they would actually spend the winter there. And they'd have food, they'd have a roof over their head, they'd have shelter, and they were taken care of.
They were free to work the fields and come back at night. They were allowed to farm in the gardens and take care of the animals without being behind bars. And it was a really nice way to put the prisoners back to work and teach them how to reacclimate to society.
There was very little security at that time, and they could go off and have a hot dog down the street, or go visit some friends elsewhere in town. It was given the name Country Club. The men were primarily housed in the earliest part of the jail, which is where there's still currently cells located. I'm not really exactly sure how many, but there's probably a good 2 dozen very small cells. These actually date, I believe, from the mid-20th century. They have been replaced over time. But they're very typical of what a mid-20th century jail cell would have. You know, it was basically just a metal bed and a little toilet bowl. There is also, I think, 3 solitary confinement cells, which are solid walls with a very small window.
Any historical building of this magnitude in town, any town would want to save. Most of our buildings are torn down or burned down. Our buildings were all made of wood, whereas you look at European buildings, they're all made of stone and they're all still intact. This is probably one of the most significant buildings, if not the most significant building in Haddam, and I think it's going to bring a lot of people to town and could be an economic driver.
The Haddam Jail, Middlesex County Jail, is worth saving for numerous reasons. I think the first would be its architectural significance. It's a fabulous building built of local granite. There aren't many of those left here in town. There were quite a few more, but those have been demolished or torn down over time.
I think what makes the jail unique is the history behind it and the property. You look at all of the old buildings that are also on the property here, just 100 feet away, you have the old piggery where they raised their pigs. The town annex building used to be their barn where they had cows. They have a root cellar here, and they grew all of their own produce.
Architecturally, it's unique because it is one of the few remaining buildings in Haddam, in the area, that is made of local granite. You have to remember this granite went all over the world, to New Orleans, to Charleston, South Carolina, to Brooklyn, to New York City, and we have very few examples left here in Middlesex County of buildings built from the local granite. So I think that makes it unique. I think it also is unique because it is one of the remaining, county jails left, within the state, New England. I mean, there are some, but I think in and of itself, it makes it unique that it is a remaining building, still standing. And the stories. I think the stories make it extremely unique.
The grant we received from DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development with the state, they focused on just historical properties who have brownfields associated with them this year. They only chose 8, and we were very lucky to be one of those 8. So they feel that giving back to towns that have a brownfield that's a historical structure, it's very hard for a town to find the extra funds to revitalize those properties. And this will allow us to have $300,000 to really focus on the jail without having to tax the taxpayers for it. The other unique part about this grant, other than it being focused on historical properties, it's assessment and planning. So they'll assess the property, the groundwater, and all of the septic system, the boiler. They'll also start planning for its reuse, where we'll hire a company as part of the $300,000 to assess what we could put here and plan for the economic growth of the jail and how it will benefit Haddam and its residents. And we'll also reach out to the community to see what they would like to see the jail become.
My vision for the jail's future is I'd like to see it self-sustaining, so that it can sort of be used in an interesting way, but support itself. I would love to have, not the entire building, but I would love to see the Historical Society have some space there to tell the story of the jail and, the people who pass through its doors, as well as maybe some space there to, share some of Haddam's history, as well as regional histories and the stories that we have to tell, artifacts and objects that we could share. We have some great things here at the Haddam Historical Society that we would love to share with the public, but we have very little display space here at the Arnold House.
There's multiple uses for the jail. We hope the grant will help us hone those down into just a few. I see it as a future art museum, historical society space. It could be office space. It's a 10,000 square foot building that has a lot of uses in its future.
My favorite thing about the jail is, I think, the stories that the jail can tell. I mean, I love the building. I think it's a significant local landmark. I could never envision Haddam without it. But I think the stories of the people who were there, who stayed there, who passed through its doors, the people who lived there, the people of Haddam who have memories and stories of it, I think that's probably my favorite part of it. And I think it's just, it's a great, great place with a lot of history.
It doesn't look like much from the outside, but when you walk through those doors and you see the bars and you see the history and the old staircase leading upstairs to the warden's area, it really hits home that this is really a jail. And I don't think that many people in town have seen the inside. And people drive by all the time. I have people ask me all the time what it looks like inside. My goal is to, by its 175th birthday, to have this open so the residents of Haddam can actually see what they really have in their town.